like that idea. So he imprisoned the leading citizens and gave orders that told his sister, upon his death, they are to be slaughtered, and there will be tears in Jerusalem when I die. How sick do you get? In the event, knowing for sure that he was dead, his sister didn't go through with it. Okay. But killing baby boys in Jerusalem, that would be nothing to Herod. And then the other thing, to note with this, Bethlehem's a tiny town. Okay. There are probably, the estimates vary, but 10, max 20 boys in this age in Jerusalem. This is not, in the history of the church, some churches have sort of made this out to be thousands, and sort of, they were not really paying attention to what goes on. Now, it's a terrible thing that's done. It's horrible and it's cruel. But historically, in the things that were going on, it is of no, apart from what we know with Jesus, it would be of no great significance. So it's no surprise that Josephus would make no announcement. Probably, may well be, he never even heard of it. Well, that brings us to point number 9. So we're going through these things again, but we're seeing lots of other stuff. Point 9 is the participation. In Egypt, Joseph is told by an angel in a dream to return to Israel. And they weren't there for all that long. Don't think of it like Jesus is. There's a book that sort of does that. Jesus grows up to 10 or 15 years of age. That is just not true. It's just a matter of months. Okay? But what we notice here is we actually are given, again, as happened earlier on, we're given a bit of a glimpse into Joseph's own thinking. All right? He was afraid about what happened, we're told. He is not mindlessly obedient, I should say. He's not mindlessly obedient. He is thoughtfully obedient. And Turner comments, he says, the interplay here between Joseph's responsible decision-making and God's leading is intriguing. When I think of an Old Testament example of that, I think of King Hezekiah in the city of Jerusalem. And on the one hand, Hezekiah is a responsible decision maker. He brings water into the city. They dig a tunnel, which you can actually go see to this very day. And on the other hand, the work of the Lord miraculously to save them. Something of the dual dynamic that takes place here with Joseph brings us to point number 10, which is the prophecy. The prophecy. And with this, we're at verse 23. And he went, Joseph, with Mary and Jesus, went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. And the difficulty with this, at least the apparent difficulty, is that there are no biblical texts which explicitly say that the Christ will be called a Nazarene. You just won't find it there. Is Matthew in error? Well, absolutely not. And obviously his knowledge of Scripture means he would not make a mistake like that. This is something he did. He knew why he was doing it. So what is he about? Well, we get a clue when we notice how he introduces this. Not the way he's spoken previously. What was spoken by the prophet, and then he would quote a particular prophecy. He doesn't do that here. He doesn't refer to a specific prophet. Here he says what was by the prophets. He's not speaking of a particular passage, but a repeated prophetic theme. Galilee was home to many Gentiles. Way back in Isaiah chapter 9, it's called Galilee of the nations, or Galilee of the Gentiles. For this very reason, Galilee is held in contempt by the sophisticated folk in Jerusalem. This is be like a highbrow, super cool New Yorker and his thoughts about Arkansas. But then even within Galilee, Nazareth itself is unsavory. So if we were to put it in the idiom, Nazareth is the wrong side of the tracks. And we see that. It's in the first chapter of the Gospel of John. You may remember that Philip goes to Nathanael. He says, we found him of whom Moses spoke in the law. We found the guy who fulfills Deuteronomy 18:18, the prophet. We found him. He's from Nazareth. And Nathanael responds, can anything good come from Nazareth? That gives you the sense of it. John 1:46. Interesting, Jesus wasn't offended by that. He says, here is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. I mean, he just says it like it is. This is how people think of Nazareth, and he spilled it out. But that gives you the sense of it. So what that means here is, it would seem that Matthew is alluding to the general teaching of the prophets, that the Messiah would be lowly and despised. Now, that's not how they were thinking in those times. They were thinking that he would be exalted. So as he thinks of his audience, they're going, well, how could he be the Messiah? Because he came from Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth. How could that be? He says, wait a second. Notice what the prophet said. The prophet said that he would be lowly and despised. That's what it means here. Okay. Daniel 9:26. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one, well, there's the Messiah, shall be cut off and shall have nothing. Psalm 22, verse 6, I'm a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind, despised by the people. Most importantly, I think, Isaiah and the servant songs. Isaiah 53, he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. Nazareth is dry ground. Okay. Brings us to point number 11, which is the point. And our time is gone. I don't think we've been pointless, though. I think these are things that should speak to our hearts and just shape it all, and we'll want to explore this more fully next week. But for just now, I'm going to give you a teaser. Last week, we looked at Deuteronomy 28. Here's something else that goes into this that we'll work out next time. Jeremiah 31, verse 7 tells us that, well, Israel is unfaithful. Israel as a nation is unfaithful. But through Jeremiah and through other prophets, there emerges a theme called the faithful remnant. There is within Israel, which is unfaithful, there is a true Israel who is faithful. But the remnant gets smaller and smaller. There's an exile to Babylon, and most people stay, but a remnant returns. Well, there's the faith, but then that faithful remnant isn't so faithful at all. The remnant gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and it finally comes to the remnant of what? One person. He is the true faithful remnant, and he is the true Israel, and his name is Jesus. And what happens here is that he relives or recapitulates the story of Israel. And where Israel was unfaithful, he is the remnant who is truly faithful. And to be a Christian is to believe in him and to be found in him, so that in him we are reckoned by God to be the true remnant and truly his children. That's the story of the Bible. We'll explore that a bit more next time. We're going to conclude now with our hymn number 101, Come Thou Almighty King.